America has been divided before, given the fact that we actually fought a full-fledged, violent civil war makes that statement axiomatic. Anyone denying this simply does not know our country's true history, and that is where a lot of the false expectations that led to disappointment and anger begin. Our founders were bitterly divided on many things, but they knew if they did not find common ground, they might fail and likely die. They entered into debate with the shared goal of establishing a new nation free from the ties to a tyrannical government. In our time, outside forces not as fully developed, implemented, or weaponized in the past have created an acute, unprecedented crisis of societal division on both a macro and micro level. Some might even argue that these forces are more fully developed, perhaps, and weaponized than in the past. This division has manifested in the people as a level of addiction to either anger and aggression or an addiction to avoidance and apathy that requires a serious intervention from both. We cannot go along to get along and hope that our leaders are honorable and that the news media is trustworthy. It is time to admit that we have been manipulated by the suppliers and dealers of chaos and conflict as they incessantly fabricate and amplify disagreements in a desperate and deliberate attempt to divide and conquer us from within. Regardless of your political persuasion, whether you currently identify as conservative, liberal, independent, unaffiliated, Democrat, Republican, anarchist, etc., there is a deeper problem that transcends the old paradigm. Our current crisis is manufactured, acute, and systemic, and it leans heavily into faith and spirituality and therefore requires more of an individual awakening or intervention rather than a sands through the hourglass passing of time. This kind of problem does not go away on its own. It must be fixed for us to survive as a nation by the grace of God. The Civil War, which erupted in 1861, was triggered over a sort of geographical dispute between southern states, which were mainly agrarian and slave-owning, and northern states, which were more industrial-based and generally slave-free, as well as disagreements over states' rights, taxation, federal authority, ongoing infiltration from England, and slavery. It was the North against the South, or blue uniforms versus gray uniforms. They had fairly clear boundaries and agendas on either side. The North prevailed and the South, albeit slowly and reluctantly, assimilated. There was profound residual bitterness, to be sure, but eventually there was healing. Other great societal divisions, including the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War, did not have geographical divisions, but rather ideological divisions, and were somewhat binary in nature, as in for or against certain ideals. Some of those divisions had some demographic features to them, such as with Vietnam, when you were more likely to find younger Americans protesting, while older Americans were wanting to, quote-unquote, stem the red tide of communism. When the Vietnam War was really much more about drugs and money, as most modern wars are, bankers' wars, with a lying media narrative that it's about truth and justice and protecting the downtrodden. It rarely has been. With the civil rights movement, you were more likely to find supporters among white Americans in the North, where slavery had long been not just forgotten but rejected. Today, however, as noted above, the differences are more thinly sliced. The nearly automatic response for some has been to attack the slightest divergence from the preferred narrative. The reward is in the sense of pleasure derived from being able to tell someone else they just aren't as righteous or virtuous or committed on the issue as you are, or that the other is an absolutist and therefore somehow superior to, and declaring the other individual now not worthy of any discussion at all. Nearly all issues of disagreement have degrees and boundaries, and finding acceptable compromises is key to any functioning relationship or society. Addictions involve a craving for the reward. Many Americans have been craving the reward of expressing outrage, winning some battle, and the associated adrenaline that accompanies it, driven by anger, perceived oppression, or feelings of being right. What is interesting is that most Americans, if you ask them, will tell you they don't want to have conflict, and they will condemn those who do. Yet many have engaged in the behavior anyway, at almost any opportunity. They will deny it if confronted, just like someone struggling with substance use disorder in denial may deny their drinking problem, but they will do it just the same. What could possibly be happening inside of our hearts that leads us to behavior that we despise in others when we see it, but that we turn to ourselves almost reflexively, providing all manner of excuses why it's all right for us, but not for others? The answer lies not in our hearts, but in our minds, quite literally in our minds. Americans seemed to have been programmed in their neural pathing towards the direction of chaos and ensuing conflict for a reward that really is not something that has any true benefit, and that proves time and again to be destructive. A kind of addiction to virtue signaling to get your crowd or your tribe to affirm you and pat you on the back more because of your publicly expressed anger or hatred for the other side or the opposing opinion. Mind wars and addiction. Much has been learned about the human brain over the past half-century, with still so much to be understood. One of the great discoveries has been that of how neural pathing works and its feature called neural plasticity. Neural pathways are a series of neurons that send signals from one part of the brain to another. At one time, it was thought that these pathways were developed only in our youth and then sort of set for the remainder of our lives. Advancements in technology over the last few decades, though, have allowed for the study of brains and the mapping of activity that clearly shows that neural pathways can be altered or reprogrammed throughout our lives. This kind of research has led to positive results for both behavioral disorders and in assisting stroke victims to regain some otherwise lost capability by training the brain to do a workaround of a damaged area, literally remapping the way information is processed and transmitted. The ability to alter how our neurons connect has led to the concept of neural plasticity, which is just what it sounds like. It reflects the sort of bendable nature of the brain and how it works, and even recovers. Basically, the more you do something or think about something, like athletes do when they visualize their action in a sport, the stronger the brain or neural pathways become. Neuroplasticity is what helps us to both make and break habits by rechanneling how we respond to cues or triggers. It takes work, but the brain can be trained to blaze new trails. With this now proven, Let's embrace it and use science to change behaviors and emotions in us that we once accepted as ingrained and unchangeable. Said simply, repetition of anything, such as feelings, thoughts, or actions, creates and strengthens the neural pathway, thereby enforcing or enhancing a new behavior or habit. Described another way, neuroplasticity means that we get better at thinking whatever we are thinking. We get more and more skilled and adept at feeling whatever emotions we are habitually hosting and entertaining. So if we don't like the direction our lives are headed, we can always choose to hear, read, watch, speak out different ideas, different perspectives. This goes for our spiritual lives and relationship with God as well. The way that we see God is largely determined by what we hear others saying, speaking, and teaching about God, whether true or false. Addiction is a behavior that can happen through neglect of the brain's ability to form new pathways, or through repetition of thoughts or behavior, enhancing that pathway negatively or in ways that harm us. In reality, that is likely the typical case, since most people don't wake up one day and say, I think I'm really going to commence working on becoming addicted to something starting now. What can happen is that through our behavior, we start to alter our pathways in our brains almost involuntarily. Our brains are a bit like water. They follow the path of least resistance. Once we start to engage in chaotic behavior, it becomes easier for our brain to follow that path, so much so that it begins to follow it naturally. This seems to be the case in much of America today, with our addiction to aggression or addiction to apathy. Whether programmed through media by toxic manipulation or organically arising from unproductive behavior, many Americans have enhanced their neural pathways in the brain that satisfies a craving. That craving, that addiction, is either anger and aggression, conflict and chaos, or avoidance and apathy. Why would we do this? Why would we start to channel a behavior that if you asked anyone, they would tell you they wanted to not get stuck in? One answer to that relates to our nature as humans, something that will be discussed later when we focus on how we developed this national addiction of either aggression or apathy. A very simple general answer is that we have become negligent in our vigilance over protecting and developing our positive neural pathways, responsibly guarding the gateways of our eyes, our ears, and our mouths, our conversation, wisely choosing what to watch, what to hear, and what to speak, so that we get better at making these wiser choices as we feed our souls, mind, will, and emotions good food, as opposed to the irresponsible feeding upon aggression and apathy. At the same time, the suppliers and dealers of either aggression or apathy are bombarding us with cues to act out, reinforcing and enhancing that behavior, even rewarding it in some ways, making it socially acceptable, even expected and praised. Another answer can be found in the state in which many of us have found ourselves to be living over recent years. That is the state of fight or flight.